joining the NeedyMeds special topic webinar, Accessing the Resources You Need to Live a Full Life with OCD. Before we get started, I'll go over a few tips. You can certainly type your questions into the questions section of your GoToWebinar control panel, but all questions will be answered at the end of the webinar. If we don't have time to answer all the questions, we will follow up with you personally via email after the webinar, probably within about a day. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing on the NeedyMeds YouTube page soon. We will also email you copies of the PowerPoint presentations that accompany the webinar after the webinar ends. So let's get started. For those of you joining us today who are not familiar with NeedyMeds, that's a shot of our home page. And our website really is the face of our organization. NeedyMeds is a national nonprofit organization, and our mission statement is educating and empowering people seeking affordable health care. Now, as you can tell by the mission statement, a big portion of our goal is educating people, and we define that in really two ways. One is certainly educating them about NeedyMeds and the resources we offer, but also hoping to educate them about other resources available for specific diagnoses, which is why we are so pleased to have our guest here with us today. It is our pleasure to introduce our panelist, Jeff Szymanski, PhD. Dr. Szymanski is currently the Executive Director of the International OCD Foundation. Previously, he was the Director of Psychological Services at McLean Hospital's OCD Institute. He is the author of The Perfectionist Handbook, based on his work at the OCD Institute. As a clinical instructor in psychology at Harvard Medical School, Dr. Szymanski has supervised predoctoral psychology interns, psychiatry residents, and he has run cognitive behavior therapy seminars. With over 80 professional presentations, Dr. Szymanski also conducts international trainings, including those in Japan, China, and Ireland. So you can see why we're so thrilled to have him with us sharing his expertise. Now, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic and screen to our guest. So please bear with us while we make that transition, which may take just a moment. Okay, Jeff, you can go ahead and take it away when you're ready. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, so welcome, everyone. Glad to be here. I like having an opportunity to talk with folks about OCD. So this is a great opportunity for me. So I want to thank Carla for inviting me to do this. Can you guys see this?
Perfect.
Okay. So as Carla mentioned, I previously worked as a psychologist at the OCD Institute at McLean Hospital, and I was there for about 7 years. The OCD Institute was the first residential treatment facility for people with OCD in the country. We primarily treated people with severe, what was called treatment-resistant OCD. What we found most of the time is that people just got poor treatment for OCD. They weren't treatment-resistant. They just weren't being treated properly. So I was there for about 7, 8 years, and then an opportunity arose to come to the foundation and to kind of rebuild it. The foundation was in a transition in 2007, 2008, and they were looking for someone to take the organization in a different direction. And in large part, I chose to kind of shift careers from a direct care psychologist to an administrator, in large part because I was struck by how difficult it is for individuals who develop OCD to find proper treatment. And in fact, some of the estimates are it takes anywhere from 14 to 17 years between the onset of symptoms and accessing effective care. So coming over to the foundation, I found an organization that was started in 1986. This was started by a group of individuals with OCD. They were participating actually in some of the first medication trials for OCD. at Yale University. And the person running the research program and running the unit, Dr. Wayne Goodman, was recommending that while they were on the unit, it was an inpatient unit, that they meet as a group and kind of get to know each other and provide mutual support. And in fact, they found it so helpful that they, upon discharge, decided to, again, kind of formally meet together more regularly, and from that came the OCD Foundation. From the beginning, their vision was really kind of everyone affected by OCD and what we call related disorders, which I can get into. But from the very beginning, it was OCD starts in childhood for most people, childhood or adolescence. So we focus on kids, teens, young adults, people with OCD, people affected by OCD. So what we know is the experience of OCD is kind of a family affair. So if you're related to someone, dating someone, married to someone, have a parent or a child with OCD, you're as affected in a large part as the person struggling with the disorder. And so our audience has really targeted, or our target has really looked at all of those different kinds of audiences. You know, again, we're based in Boston, but we have partnered with people around the country, and we have what we call affiliates, which are otherwise called chapters, have those in several states around the country, and in the last few years have reached out to other nonprofits around the world who have OCD or an anxiety disorder as part of their mission. And so we work with people anywhere from the United Kingdom all the way over to Japan and kind of everywhere in between. So again, our mission is to help anyone affected by OCD and related disorders. You might hear in some education that OCD is not a curable disorder. That's for the most part accurate in that if you develop OCD symptoms, they are something that you may in larger or smaller degrees struggle with throughout your life. There are a number of people, though, that once they get effective treatment and they really stick with the principles of that treatment, they really report, you know, I have some obsessions come up here and there, but I know exactly how to respond to them, and I'm not run by this anymore. It's really kind of on low volume in my life. So our goal is not so much curing, although we would love to cure OCD, but really for folks that are affected by OCD to really maximize the life that they're able to lead. And that is primarily about helping them access effective treatment. Now, one of the main obstacles to accessing effective treatment is stigma. I must be crazy if I'm experiencing this. I don't know what I'm experiencing. If I have a mental illness, what does that mean? Will they lock me up? What will other people think about me? Will I lose my job? All those kinds of things. So we work a lot on education and reducing stigma. And then we do a lot around, again, not just people affected by OCD, but we work a lot with researchers and therapists around the country and around the world. All of the education that we present in webinars like this and on our website and in our informational brochures all comes from members of our research and therapy community. So again, this is what we're kind of teaching and educating people all comes from research, which is how we want to base our decisions. We don't want to go into someone's office and say, you're a caring person, please help me with my OCD. That's actually not helpful for people with OCD. They need a very specialized type of treatment. So we work to train professionals around the country to ensure that their skill level is what it should be in working with people with OCD. So again, we have a variety of educational activities that we do, a lot of awareness raising, a lot of working with professionals, networking them, making sure that they're talking with each other, educating each other, and again, and I'll get into this a little bit later, we actually support research by doing some grant funding. So a little bit more specific about our programs. We have a number of education and training programs. Our largest one is our annual OCD conference, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Really the unique aspect of the conference is that top researchers and therapists come to this conference to present and to attend, but we also have people with OCD and family members that have someone that they love with OCD, and they're also attendees and presenters, so it's a pretty cool conference. We also have an integrated training institute for professionals. We have a quarterly newsletter, and this is information about our programs. It's typically personal stories from people in our community, and it is information again about updates in research and therapy that we're communicating to our membership. We do a lot of brochures, fact sheets, informational stuff that we send out to other medical and mental health professionals to make sure they're up to date. And then we've spent a lot of time working on, we now have 4 different websites. We have our main website, the IOCDF.org. Tons of information on that site, and I'll pull that up when I spend a little bit more time on that. We have a great resource directory that I think is very helpful, but there's tons of educational information on there as well. Then we built a site because how OCD shows up in kids and how it affects families and the nature of the treatment is different. We have a different website for OCD as it's experienced in childhood. And then I was talking about OCD and related disorders. So what people had noticed when they were working with individuals with OCD is that there were some other conditions that looked like OCD but also didn't look like OCD. And so one of them was hoarding disorder, and it used to be called compulsive hoarding and was thought of as a subtype of OCD. But I've worked with folks with OCD and I've worked with people with hoarding disorder, and they really are, there's some overlap, but there are also some distinct differences between those two groups. And so they fall under our umbrella. And so we've worked with Gail Steckedy and Randy Frost. These are 2 clinicians and researchers who really did the seminal research in the last 15 to 20 years to help all of us understand how and why hoarding disorder is its own category. And that, again, how you work with someone with hoarding disorder, what the treatment is all fairly different. I don't have to explain hoarding disorder these days in the way that I used to since the advent of a lot of the hoarder shows, which I think has been kind of a double-edged sword. I think it's been great in terms of raising awareness that there's a number of people that are really struggling with this. I think the treatment that they portray isn't always the most accurate. And then we have a website devoted specifically to folks that are affected by body dysmorphic disorder. Body dysmorphic disorder is a preoccupation with how you look in some way. And again, so it looks obsessive, it looks compulsive, so there are a lot of overlaps with OCD, but again, because it's specifically centered around your appearance, again, people began to think maybe these are 2 different things, and then the more we understood and worked with people suffering from BDD, we recognized they actually were a different group with different needs and a different treatment. So that's our education and training. We also run a couple awareness raising programs. One is our walk. We started in Boston about 4 years ago, and we now partner with our affiliates. And so we have several walks going on around the country, and that program continues to build. And it's part fundraising and part an opportunity to just kind of come together as a community and to educate the public about what OCD is. And again, that's the core message in OCD Awareness Week. It's the 2nd week in October, and we work with our global partners and affiliates to run events all over the country and all over the world. We do a lot of virtual online things that people can participate in. We've had video contests, we've had online chats like this and webinars, so we try and do that each year. In terms of resources, again, our affiliates are just kind of smaller versions of us. They're all over the country. They're run by volunteers. Some have newsletters. They all have websites. They'll do lecture series. They'll participate in the walk. They're a great resource for where support groups are or where helpful therapists might be that people can access. And then that leads me to the resource directory. And again, I'll pull this up later. Our resource directory is a integrated database, searchable database, where you can look for an OCD specialist or a program or institution that specializes in OCD, or a support group or an affiliate. And again, I'll take you guys through that a little bit later. And then finally, again, the information that we share and promote comes from research findings. And so we go out of our way to make sure that we are funding research in this area. So just kind of, I'll go back and talk a little bit more about each of these in a little bit more depth. So the annual conference, this will be our 24th year. We typically run the conference in July. This year it's July 7th through 9th. It's held in San Francisco. The last 2 years we've had 1,600 to 1,700 people attend. We have people of all ages. We had 125, 130 kids and teens that came last year. Some had OCD, some had a sibling that had OCD, some had a parent that had OCD. So again, lots of workshops and support groups. It's a really great community where, again, you're having conversations. As for myself as a therapist, I'm having conversations with parents and with people with OCD, and then I'm having conversations at the same time with colleagues and learning kind of cutting edge research from other colleagues. So again, a 3-day event, lots of training, lots of education. Lots of people really develop great relationships and friendships that exist outside the conference. A lot of people have developed clinics and partnerships and other businesses as a result of having met each other at our conference. So it's a great networking and community building as well as educational opportunity. We do have a website if you're interested in getting more information about that, and the link is right there on the slide. So our training institute, what we had done a number of years ago, again, I'd mentioned one of the primary missions of the organization is ensuring that people have access to effective treatment. So the bad news about if you have OCD and treatment is if you go to a typically trained therapist, you go to your local hospital or community mental health center or clinic and say, I have OCD, or I think I have OCD, can I meet with someone? On average, that therapist is actually not going to know how to help you. And they may not know that they don't know how to help you. There are specific ways to treat OCD. They aren't always what is taught in school when you're going to get trained as a mental health clinician, which is unfortunate, to say the least. And so we have kind of filled in that gap over the years of if you didn't get that training in your graduate school training, and you have patients with OCD and you're recognizing that you're not being helpful, we have a series of trainings that people can go through, anywhere from introductory. We have kind of a college system. We now have 100, 200, 300, 400 level courses meant to be from introductory up to advanced. These trainings range from online trainings, webinars we have some online courses we run in collaboration with the Massachusetts General Hospital Psychiatry Academy. And so that's just kind of an introduction and primer to what is OCD, how do you diagnose it, how do you recognize it, how do you treat it. And then that's followed up by a more foundational training course that we call the Behavior Therapy Training Institute. And these are 3-day in-person trainings. They're small groups. It's a group of 30 people that come together. And again, they work together for 3 days, and then there's some follow-ups. These trainings typically sell out in anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes because they are small, they're expensive to run. We move them around the country. And again, we keep the enrollment low to ensure that people are getting quality training. And so that's why we built this kind of broader training institute, to ensure that people had additional training opportunities. So we're now working with people that have been through some of these trainings. We have senior people that we work with around the country, and they are doing online consultation groups. So we have 3 professionals, 3 therapists around the country, and they get onto a Google Hangout or a program like this, and they're meeting with a top expert in the field who has treated hundreds or thousands of people with OCD and done the research and written the textbooks. We only work with the very senior experts who are our faculty. And then we have another series of advanced trainings on advanced topics for therapists, again, who are feeling like they've gotten a good foundation and they're getting better at treating OCD. but when they run into complicated or severe cases, they're getting stuck, and so we've developed some trainings around that. Again, I've already talked about the OCD newsletter. This goes out quarterly. And again, anywhere from personal stories, we know from research that one of the best ways to reduce stigma is to share stories for people that this is how I developed OCD, this is what it looked like and felt like, this is the treatment I got, this is how my life has improved. And that kind of education, rather than saying, you know, don't be disrespectful and dismissive about OCD, more kind of putting a face on it, putting a story to it is more effective in reducing stigma. And so we use the OCD newsletter to do that, as well as to disseminate more recent information about what's coming out in kind of therapy technique and strategy, and again, what's coming out in research. Again, I've talked a little bit about our 4 websites. Again, lots of information on all of these. Again, very senior people. We work with all the senior people in pediatric OCD, as well as people who, again, kind of in the same way that Gail and Randy identified that hoarding disorder was different from OCD. People like Kathy Phillips and Sabine Wilhelm did some of the early work in identifying BDD as its own thing, and so they were very helpful in helping develop our website there as well. The only other thing I'll say about the walk, again, you can participate virtually, you can participate potentially in your community depending on where you are, but I'll just share with you the inspiration for the walk actually was from a parent who lost his son to suicide. Nathaniel Aslan had body dysmorphic disorder, a related disorder of OCD. And after the suicide, Dennis was understandably heartbroken and found it therapeutic. He felt a little bit better when he was walking more. So he came up with this idea of walking from his hometown in Pennsylvania up to Boston, and contacted us and wanted us to help him build a website and follow. And he was doing education and kind of talking about his son and raising awareness and doing some fundraising along the way. And so we used that as our inspiration for our walk, because it was a 500-mile walk that took about 7 weeks. You know, they estimate that it's about 2,000 steps per mile. And so he was talking about this at the rally we held for him, and he said it took me 1 million steps to get here, and that kind of stuck with us. So that's why we call it the 1,000,000 Steps for OCD Walk. OCD Awareness Week, again, partnering with people around the country, around the world to do in-person events, for people to go to lectures, for people to go to, again, an educational series about OCD. But again, we do a lot of things online using our social media, Facebook, Twitter, all that kind of stuff. Let me pull up, if I can get out of here for a second, I'll show you our website. So again, this is IOCDF.org. So we have easy to follow buttons here, about OCD, about us, about the programs that we offer. On the second screen, it's, again, we typically promote one of our bigger events that's coming up. This is the annual conference. What I wanted people to kind of notice on here, if you click on About OCD, very straightforward, basic information about what is OCD, who gets it, what are the causes, how is it diagnosed, how is it treated, and again, a lot of information, psychoeducation on the website for people to find. But one of the, I think, more useful aspects of the website is this resource directory. So if you go to this Find Help, and I'm in Boston, Massachusetts, so I just type in Boston, and then listing types, I can look for therapists, clinics, programs, support groups, organizations. We'll say everything when we hit Find. Now we have a great Yelp-style menu, so I can look for Boston-based resources for adolescents, for adults, for children, what their payment types are like, what their treatment strategies are, what their specialty areas are, so I can narrow my focus. If we just look within a 25-mile radius, we have Jen Greenberg who shows up. When we click on her, we have some contact information about her. We have her describing her background and training, what her specialty areas are, treatment strategies, payment types, etc. So a nice kind of, inform the consumer strategy that we use. And again, we have about 1,400 to 1,500 therapists in our database. I think 70 to 75 programs and clinics. I think around 300 support groups. So there's a lot of information in this resource directory. So let's get back out of there. Okay, so that's the website. Our affiliates, again, we have them in 24 US states and territories. They do a lot of great work with us throughout the year, partnering with us through OCD Awareness Week and at the conference. Again, they're all unpaid volunteers. They just do a great job. Our research grants, we've generated over $3 million in funding and have been awarded. We typically award 3 to 5 research projects a year. We typically get about 40 to 50 proposals, so it's very, very competitive. And again, it could be anything from trying to understand why people develop OCD to improving our treatment methods to how is OCD manifest differently in kids versus adults. All of these donations are private donors that come to us and say we want to support research, and 100% of that funding goes directly to these research projects. We have a scientific and clinical advisory board. They review those grants. They help us write educational material that you'll see on our websites. These are folks that, again, are seen as the experts and leaders in the field, and so we refer to them when we have questions and we're trying to improve education dissemination for people. And we talked about accessing resources, and sometimes that's where people are at, where they need resources, and sometimes the resources they need is to get more involved, to have more engagement. And so I typically, when I talk about the foundation, talk about ways, if that's at a place where you want to be, you know, there are things that you can do, including something like attending or starting a support group. What we find kind of throughout the OCD community is that people say, when I meet, I feel like I'm the only one who has this, and when I meet someone else who has these similar struggles, it makes a world of difference. And so having that kind of community can be incredibly helpful. We also look for volunteers, whether it's at our annual OCD conference or we have remote projects. We have volunteers who come in into the office and help out with traditional kind of nonprofit kind of stuff. And people volunteer again through our affiliate. If people want to be members of the foundation, in large part that just means that you're part of a community. You're connected to us in a particular kind of way. That's how you get access to the newsletter. But again, feeling a part of something kind of decreases the isolation that a lot of people report that they feel. We are a nonprofit, so we are 100% funded by individual and private donors. And so, you know, some of what we do is about generating funding so that we can continue to do all these programs. Here are the links for our different websites. And again, if anyone had any specific questions, we have our community support coordinator who mans our info@iocdf.org account. Anywhere from where can I find out more information to help me kind of figure out how to get the proper therapist to more information about one of our programs that someone might want to attend. So that was the slideshow that I wanted to go through. Carla, did you want to do questions? I had a second set of slides that we can go through also if people wanted to do that, and it's just kind of an overview about OCD. In case people, again, we find this all the time, that people, they have something that's going on, and a lot of the messages in popular media either are caricature or just kind of talk about a subtype of OCD, and so people don't typically have a broad understanding of the different variations and subtypes of OCD and what it actually looks like and what the treatment looks like. So I'm happy to spend time going through that if people would like to do that as well.
Great. First of all, Dr. Szymanski, thank you so much for the very thorough presentation about what International OCD Foundation focuses on and really the wide breadth of resources that they available. What I found most particularly interesting is how important it is to find a therapist that is trained and qualified to treat this diagnosis. So that's a big deal. I'm going to go ahead and certainly open up the floor for questions. And I'm going to suggest that if anybody would like Dr. Szymanski go through the next PowerPoint presentation, which he just briefly described, we can certainly do that. So let me know via the questions section if you'd like him to run through that. But certainly we will send you either way a copy of that PowerPoint presentation so that you can refer to it for reference. And also it may prompt other questions you may have to reach out to the International OCD Foundation. So again, feel free to go ahead and type in your questions into the question section of your GoToWebinar control panel. And while we wait for those to come in, I'm going to go ahead and ask you, Dr. Szymanski, for now to switch the screen back to me. And I'm going to go over a few resources that some of our attendees might find helpful through the NeedyMeds website. Actually, before we take over, here's one thing that's coming in, Dr. Szymanski, question. Do you recommend, if somebody has gone to a therapist and they really, they've looked at your list of criteria for a therapist or maybe how to find one, but let's say they had already been to one prior to this webinar and they've been diagnosed and it seems that they're comfortable with it, it makes sense, the therapist seems qualified. In that situation, do you recommend getting a second opinion anyway? How would you approach, just talk a little bit more about making sure the people are getting in touch with the right therapist?
Yeah, so I think it's two things. So a therapist should be able to talk about exposure and response prevention, and I can talk a little bit more about that. That's the primary treatment for treating OCD. Another treatment for treating OCD is medication. And so the primary medications that are used are the same ones that are used in treating depression. So they're called antidepressants or they're called SSRIs. SSRIs just means this is a medication you're putting in your brain that's affecting one of your brain chemicals and it alters your mood. So some people have found that have OCD that when they take these medications that they get better. But you need someone who I'm not a psychiatrist, so I always have to kind of preface this. But what I've been told by psychiatrists who treat OCD is that if you don't know the specifics of OCD and the medication treatment of OCD, you will probably underprescribe, not prescribe for long enough. The doses need to be a little bit higher. You need to know some of that. So that's one thing. The other thing is if you're going to a non-psychiatrist and they say they do OCD treatment, they should be talking about exposure and response prevention. And primarily what they're going to describe to you is a face your fears strategy. It's if you're afraid of dogs, the way to get over being afraid of dogs isn't to run every time you see a dog, it's to find different ways to approach the dog and to interact with the dog in a different way. And over time, your anxiety will go down. Well, with OCD, it's the same basic strategy. We're going to expose you to things that make you anxious, and we're going to have you not engage in the compulsive behavior. That's the response prevention. And what you learn in doing this is a different behavior. And then your brain and your body learns something new, which is that what I thought was anxiety-provoking and dangerous actually isn't. So what I say to people when they say, am I in the right treatment, is, are you in medication treatment, or are you in exposure response prevention treatment, or are you in both? And are you getting better? And exposure response prevention treatment and medication treatment should start to show effects. You should start to feel better in anywhere from 6 to 12 sessions. You won't be symptom-free in 6 to 12 sessions, but you should be getting educated, learning the basics, and or taking some of the medication. If you're not seeing after 6, 10, 12 sessions, you're seeing no improvement, you're probably not in the right treatment. Again, you shouldn't be expecting massive improvements, although some people do. Some people respond very quickly to either medication or ERP or both. But this is a kind of treatment that you should see working relatively quickly.
That is very helpful, and you delve right into the next question that I was going to ask, which is how long after the treatment begins should somebody begin to see some sort of an improvement. And as you stressed, although it certainly does vary from patient to patient, that's a really good guideline for the first 6 up to 12 weeks. That's very useful. And Dr. Szymanski, it does look like we're getting a series of requests for you to actually go over your second PowerPoint presentation, if you don't mind sharing that with us. So I will go ahead and switch the screen back to you.
Okay, so the DSM-5, what this means is, this is short for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and it's the 5th edition. So what this means is anyone in mental health goes to this manual to say, what does a psychiatric disorder look like, and what do I need to be looking for to call what someone's experiencing this versus this, schizophrenia versus depression versus OCD. So that is in kind of a broad brushstroke. Previously, OCD was considered an anxiety disorder, and other anxiety disorders are things like post-traumatic stress disorder, social anxiety disorder, generalized anxiety disorders, phobias, kind of animal phobias. They were all put into the same group. And what they found through research is that although for the most part people that have OCD experience anxiety, they also report a lot of guilt. They report a lot of disgust experiences. So it isn't just anxiety. And the other thing they found, and what I found really interesting about some of the research, is that when you do neuroimaging studies, we put you in a scanner and we take pictures of your brain. And if we put a bunch of people with different anxiety disorders in the scanner, their brains, when they're symptomatic, light up similarly. Their brains are reacting in a similar kind of way. And OCD actually is doing its own thing. And so for all kinds of reasons, they decided it doesn't look as much like the other anxiety disorders, and so we're going to pull it out and move it into its own group. And then what they had realized, and what people had been writing about and talking about for many years, is that things like hoarding disorder and body dysmorphic disorder looked quite a bit like OCD and were different. So they're now grouped to get together, along with hair pulling disorder. Trichotillomania is the kind of old kind of word, they still use it. I like the word, it's hard to remember and hard to pronounce. But it's basically people that are pulling out their hair. Now, when you talk about, and then there's skin picking disorder. So people pick at their skin and they pick at their nails and you pull an eyelash out. That's not a disorder, right? So the thing to remember when you're talking about someone with body dysmorphic disorder who doesn't like their appearance, there's all kinds of things I don't like about my appearance. There has to be a time-consuming, significantly impairing aspect to this. I can't get out of my house. I can't take care of my kids. I'm going to lose my job. I can't get to sleep. I can't take care of myself, right? So a diagnosis, a psychiatric diagnosis, is it looks a particular way. There are certain behaviors associated with it, and it's significantly getting in the way of you living your life. So, but specific to OCD, in order to have a diagnosis of OCD, you need to have the presence of obsessions or compulsions or both. And for the most part, most people agree that obsessions and compulsions happen at the same time. So let's go over these. So what is an obsession? Now, the interesting thing when I teach people about what obsessive compulsive disorder is this disorder suffers a little bit from the fact that obsession is a general term, and it's used in everyday language. And it's informed a little bit by kind of personality theory, right? So if I say I'm an obsessive person, what I mean is I think a lot, I worry a lot, I talk a lot, I'm kind of concerned about things, I'm always problem solving, or I like something a lot. I'm obsessed with the color blue, right? That isn't what we mean when we talk about obsession in obsessive compulsive disorder. Obsession is specifically when someone experiences recurrent, they happen over and over again, they're persistent, they happen a lot. They can be thoughts, urges, or images. They're intrusive, I don't want these, and they generate a lot of anxiety or other kinds of distress or both. When you experience these obsessions, these thoughts and urges and images, you try to ignore them, suppress them, neutralize them, get rid of them. Basically, that's the definition of a compulsion. So a compulsion Same problem as obsession. I'm a compulsive Red Sox fan. I follow everything they do. I'm obsessed by them, right? We have all this mixing up of language in our everyday conversation, which is why OCD is so misunderstood. In obsessive compulsive disorder, compulsion again, has a very specific meaning. I do a repetitive behavior, or I do something in my mind, I do a mental act that I feel like I have to do in order to get rid of the obsession or decrease the frequency of it or completely make it go away. And I do this in a very rigid, kind of routinized way. I'm trying to make the obsession go away. I'm trying to make the anxiety and the distress that came along with the obsession go away. I'm trying to make something bad might happen is a common theme in OCD. But when you look at it, so we all have our routines, and if you look at superstitions, again, I mentioned the Red Sox, if you look in baseball, they have all kinds of superstitions that they might engage in. But again, these aren't getting in their way. So, with people with OCD, they, for the most part, they recognize the compulsive behavior I'm doing, I don't want to do. I'm not eccentric. I'm not just kind of trying to be weird for the sake of being weird. Like, I don't like having to do this. I just feel like I have this crushing anxiety and all these other feelings and these horrible thoughts that I can't make go away. And the only way I've figured out how to kind of turn down the volume is to engage in these behaviors that I even know don't make any sense. And then some people don't recognize that. The majority of people do. And if you talk with little kids that have OCD, they may not quite get that awareness. But for the most part, people know that what they're doing, they don't need to be doing, they don't want to be doing. It's that they feel like it's the only thing they can do to get away from the thoughts and the feelings. So again, talking about any psychological disorder, the symptoms have to be time-consuming. They have to be distressing. They have to get in your way. And they can't be caused by something else. So some people that develop dementia or some people that develop a substance abuse problem might develop OCD-looking symptoms, and you have to kind of rule that out. But again, for the most part, they're experiencing lots of thoughts and images that are very distressing to them, very anxiety-provoking to them. They're spending a lot of time trying to get rid of them or reduce the feelings associated with them, and they're not taking care of themselves and taking care of their life. That's when you have OCD. Now, for some kids, they can develop OCD through a kind of haywired reaction their body has to an infection. And so this is literally catching a mental illness through an infection. And so for younger kids and teens, what we're seeing is, and this started with kids that were developing strep infections. And again, this is the vast majority of kids that have strep infections don't develop OCD. And even we don't know the exact estimates, but we're thinking the number of folks that develop OCD this way is pretty small, but big enough that people are seeing it in clinics and seeing it in hospitals. And what's notable about this is, so a kid gets an infection, the body creates their immune system to fight the infection, actually backfires. And something happens that researchers are still trying to figure out, but the antibodies cross the blood-brain barrier, and they go to the part of the brain that we know is implicated in OCD, and it inflames that part of the brain. And these kids get an infection, and they go from a normal, happy, high-functioning kid, and in 2 days, they have severe and very quickly kind of happening OCD symptoms. And so that's what over time, they focused less on the strep and more on the fact that it happens, again, very quickly and very severely. And again, you see this in a subset, but I always do this education because you want to go and get ERP or psychiatric medication potentially for these folks. But because pediatricians, on average, have been trained to be more judicious about when they give antibiotics, there's sometimes the kid comes in and they're like, this is a psychiatric issue, but an infection happened, why don't we just give them antibiotics? And lo and behold, we are finding that for some of these kids, if you give them antibiotics, not only does the infection clear, but all of the OCD symptoms clear, which is really fascinating. Not for all of them, but for some of them. So it's very important that people kind of know about this version of OCD, that it's treatable, and it's treatable in a different kind of way. So again, it's a significant and drastic change. They can not just have OCD symptoms, they can develop tics. They end up with a lot of eating problems, a lot of separation anxiety, anger management problems. Again, we don't know the reasons for all this. This has only been being looked at for the last maybe 10 or 15 years. Again, kind of the way I try and help people understand whether you have OCD or whether you don't have OCD is comparing it to other disorders that look similar. So I just mentioned tics. People might have heard of Tourette syndrome. So tics and Tourette's just means you have a lot of tics, a lot of different kinds of tics. Tics are things where you're repeating a behavior, like you're blinking your eye, or you're touching things, you're tapping things, or you're clearing your throat, those kinds of things. But for people with tics, when you ask them, why are you doing this? They say, I just have this physical discomfort that I need to get rid of. People with OCD will do blinking and touching and tapping or clearing their throat, but they do it because they have an obsession. And that obsession can range from all kinds of different themes that I can get into in just a few minutes. But a tic is, I do it because my body feels better. There's no thought associated with it, versus I just did those repetitive behaviors because an obsession happened. Again, trichotillomania is hair pulling disorder. Again, I've worked with folks that it isn't pulling a hair or two out, it's pulling vast amounts of hair from their scalp, from other parts of their body. I worked with a woman who was pulling out every hair out of her legs, her pubic area, and her underarms. And she was doing this every day, spending up to 3 or 4 hours doing this. So again, it can be very severe. It's not just pulling hair. But similar to tics, it isn't about, there's no obsession, there's no thought that accompanies it. It's just, when I pull out hair, I feel better. I get a feeling that I want to have. It's not, I'm trying to get away from a feeling. It's, I want to feel some sort of relief. And so the treatment is a little bit different. Versus people, again, with OCD, I'm doing these repetitive behaviors because I have an obsession and I have anxiety I'm trying to get away from. People with body dysmorphic disorder do a lot of repetitive checking, but their checking is all about how they look. People with OCD aren't particularly concerned about how they look. Their concerns about body image or how they look are the same as in the general population. People with body dysmorphic disorder are going to multiple plastic surgeries. They might be doing their own plastic surgery on themselves. They are a highly isolated group. They have a concerning level of suicidal ideation, suicidal behaviors. Again, so there's a lot of overlap in what the behavior looks like, but why they do it is different, and the treatment looks different, and the experience of having BDD is different. There is in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual a number of what we call personality disorders. I think that's not maybe the best term. So there is an obsessive compulsive personality disorder. These folks don't really have compulsions. While they do things like make lists and they might hoard things and be very perfectionistic, they don't really have a problem with the perfectionistic behavior or the repetitive behavior. And their symptoms really, if you kind of look at the criteria for it, it really centers all around perfectionism. Again, with people with OCD, some of it's perfectionism, some of it's some other stuff. The themes just tend to be different. People with OCD can look like folks with autism spectrum disorder. You might have heard of Asperger's. People with Asperger's and autism will do these kind of stereotyped and repetitive behaviors. They might have an obsessive interest in something. But people with autism aren't trying to prevent their thoughts. They typically only do the kind of repetitive stuff. You don't see in folks with autism the kind of range of other compulsive behaviors that you see with people with OCD. And again, autism is marked by kind of this interpersonal challenge that these folks have. What we call impulse control disorders, so problems with gambling, sexual impulsivity, impulsive shopping. We call these broadly impulse control disorders. And while they do the same kinds of behaviors and have some attention problems, people with impulse control disorders seek out risk and wanting to feel that kind of excitement. People with OCD are terribly risk averse. I don't like feeling too happy or too excited or too challenged, or again, they tend to be, I'm trying to not feel stuff. So these groups tend to look quite different in that respect. So let's just spend a couple minutes. I'll go through these really quickly, just so that people get a sense of the breadth of OCD symptoms and what some of the themes are. So the ones that, in terms of the obsessions that are the most common and well understood, are contamination. This could be fear of dirt or germs or body fluids or disease or being poisoned. Interesting, people feel that they can be contaminated by another person's negative qualities. We call this emotional contamination. The compulsions associated with those are, again, things that people might have seen in popular media, on the As Good as It Gets movie, the hand washing and wipes and the excessive showering, that kind of stuff. With checking, you have obsessions, so not trusting yourself. Did I lock the door? Did I turn off the stove? If I didn't lock the door, if I didn't turn off the stove, is something bad going to happen? These folks also report, and I'll talk a little bit about this in a minute, violent and sexual intrusive thoughts. Common checking compulsions, checking appliances, locks, pockets, what we call reassurance seeking. I'm not going to go back and check the stove, but you tell me, because you were with me, that I turned off the stove. And then you might ask that as someone with OCD, you might ask that of the person with you 5 times or 10 times or 20 times or 50 times. So that's reassurance seeking. Mental reviewing is, I'm going to play over and over and over in my mind to make sure that I feel confident and clear and secure that I did lock that door, or whatever the obsession is. For repeating behaviors, the obsession is I need to do something until it feels right, or I don't want to make a mistake. You see this in perfectionism. The compulsions tend to be being overly thorough. If you see a kid that has perfectionistic OCD, they're writing the same thing over and over again, and the words don't look right, or it's not perfect enough, and so they'll turn in homework late because they want it to look just perfect enough. Compulsions also are trying to neutralize the obsessions. You know, if I think a bad thought of something happening to my mother, I have to think a good thought of something happening to my mother. In perfectionism, you see things, people being concerned about things looking right, wanting things to be absolutely certain, being overly preoccupied with making mistakes. So you see lots of ordering and arranging, and these very rigid routines and how they have to do things. People that have counting as a subtype, if they'll have good numbers and bad numbers, and good numbers signify something good will happen, bad numbers signify something bad's going to happen. They might be doing things like, if a good number is 5 and they see a 3 and 3 is a bad number, they might have to do something 5 times or count to 5 or say the number 5 in order to undo it. I talked about superstitions. They can get exaggerated for folks with OCD, and they become preoccupied with fear of the devil or bad numbers or cemeteries. And so they do a lot of neutralizing, praying, and staying away from things that remind them of those superstitions. Then we have OCD as it affects your faith, whether you're Catholic or Protestant or Muslim or Hindu. People become preoccupied with, I'm not practicing my faith the right way. I'm offending God. I'm going to go to hell. I'm committing a sin. So you see, whatever their faith-based practice is, they're exaggerating it and spending too much time on it. So if they're a Catholic, they might be going to confession all the time and praying all the time, beyond what other people in their faith-based community are doing. And again, all these behaviors aren't coming out of their relationship with their religion. It's been distorted through the lens of OCD, and they're now practicing the religion according to OCD rules, not the rules of the religion anymore. There are people that become obsessed with, I'm going to harm myself, or I'm going to somehow lose control or act inappropriately. So you see a lot of social withdrawal, a lot of the checking and reassurance behavior. So then we have a group of folks that have what we call violent thoughts. So I'm going to somehow accidentally, I don't know how, hurt someone. I don't want to hurt someone. The idea of that terrifies me. The idea of somehow losing control and this happening is extremely upsetting to me. These folks typically have no violent history in their past. They're abhorred by violence, but they become obsessed with this idea of this might somehow happen. And so they engage in lots of, again, checking, suppressing their thoughts, mentally reviewing, am I in control, not in control? And then they start avoiding anything that might be possibly violent or, again, quote unquote, victims. Same issue around sexual thoughts. We have violent thoughts, sexual thoughts, religious thoughts. All these are, again, kind of these taboo topics. So people become concerned that I'm not the person I want to be. And again, they start to listen to and believe the kinds of things that their OCD is saying, not believe I'm a pedophile, but believe, oh my goodness, somehow I might lose control and something might happen and I might do this. And so again, similar kinds of compulsions that are associated. Now, the interesting thing in what we teach people with violent and sexual intrusive thoughts is everyone on this seminar, and Carl and I also have violent and sexual thoughts all the time. We just don't worry about them. We go, oh, isn't that weird that my brain kind of threw that out? It's kind of like a dream, like, wow, I can't believe I dreamed that. And unfortunately, Freud is wrong, and we don't dream things for certain reasons, and we don't have thoughts for certain reasons. Some of it really just is completely random. But for folks with OCD, they treat every thought as important. And what we talk about is kind of this thought-action fusion. If I had this thought, that feels the same as if I actually did it. If I thought about harm coming to someone, harm did come to someone. Very quickly, I already talked a little bit about the treatment, exposure response prevention. If you aren't getting exposure response prevention, you're not in the right treatment. We actually ask you to, so the theory behind it is obsessions trigger the intense feelings of anxiety or other feelings. The compulsions are engaged in to make that go away. And so the compulsive behavior, unfortunately, is reinforced or rewarded because you partially got rid of this stuff. I was feeling really bad, now I don't feel as bad. The problem is now you're stuck in the cycle. And over time, your compulsive behavior is less and less effective. And so the way out actually is to not try to, people with OCD try to stop having the obsessions. You can't do that. It's stop engaging in the compulsive behavior. So let yourself be anxious. Find out whether this is dangerous or not. It sounds scary and it sounds overly simplistic, and that's because I'm trying to go over it in 2 minutes. But it actually is a complicated and very difficult therapy, but also very effective. Here are the medications. Again, this information, as Carla said, you guys can have these slides, and this is also posted on our website. So these are medication doses that are recommended by the chair of our scientific advisory board. About 70% of people with OCD will benefit from either medication or ERP, and they report usually a 50 to 80% reduction. Again, that's people in general. Some people might have 100% response, some people might not have a response. But the medication you have to take for a period of time, and some people experience a relapse when they go off the medication, some people don't. And ERP is hard, and so that's some of the challenges, is how do we make exposure response prevention a little bit more effective. And then the last piece I'll leave you guys with is what we call family accommodation behaviors. So what happens is that the person is suffering so much with OCD that they begin to pull other family members into participating in their OCD symptoms. And so whenever I work with someone with OCD, I typically also work with their family and talk with family members about how to respond to the person with OCD in a different way that isn't reinforcing their OCD behaviors. And I will end on that note.
Thank you so much, Dr. Szymanski. I'm so glad our participants requested to see this additional PowerPoint presentation, because I think it really, for me, certainly, it cleared up quite a few, honestly, misconceptions I had, and also sort of put a fine point on some of the things you touched on earlier in the webinar. So thank you, of course, for being so generous with your time and certainly sharing your expertise. Now, again, those of you that would like to ask questions, you can do so by shooting them into the questions section of your GoToWebinar panel. And before we wrap up, what I'd like to do actually is touch upon a few NeedyMeds resources that you may find helpful. So, Dr. Szymanski, if you could go ahead and switch the screen back to me. And then I'll switch to my PowerPoint presentation, which hopefully you guys can see now. Can you see that?
Yes.
Great. So what I wanted to briefly mention before we wrap up in just a couple of moments is NeedyMeds focuses, as I had said in the beginning when I mentioned our mission statement, on helping people to afford necessary medications and other healthcare expenses. So since Dr. Szymanski brought up at the end of this recent PowerPoint presentation some of the commonly prescribed medications used in the diagnosis of OCD, I wanted to point out some ways through NeedyMeds in which we can help you to afford those medications if either you don't have insurance coverage or your insurance coverage doesn't cover medication or this particular type of medication that you may need. So really briefly, I'm going to bring up 3 or 4 NeedyMeds cost savings resources, and these are specifically, again, resources to help you afford medications. First of all, we have a robust section on our database dedicated to prescription assistance programs. Those are programs sponsored by pharmaceutical companies that offer deeply discounted or free medications to those who qualify for the program. As you would guess, the program guidelines do vary from program to program, but certainly it's worth checking out. We also offer something called diagnosis-based assistance programs, which means via our website or through calling our 800 number, instead of checking for a particular medication, you can see if there are cost-saving programs available for a diagnosis, and in this case, it would be OCD. We also offer coupons, rebates, free samples, and trial offers for various prescription medications. And lastly, we do offer a NeedyMeds drug discount card. Our hope is actually that you don't have to use our card, meaning that our hope, of course, is that everybody has the insurance coverage they need. If they don't, our first goal is to connect you with a program that will work specifically for that medication, such as a prescription assistance, diagnosis-based assistance program, a coupon, or rebate. If you don't have insurance, if you don't qualify for any of these programs, then the last resort would be using the NeedyMeds drug discount card. It is absolutely free. It's completely anonymous. You don't need to register for it. You just get in touch with NeedyMeds. We'll ship you, or you can download a free NeedyMeds drug discount card, and you simply take that card with you to your local pharmacy with your valid prescription. And we like to say that you can save up to 0 to 80% off of the cash price of prescription. The reason I say 0 is because not all drugs will have a cost savings option, and we can save you up to 80%. I will let you know that the average person saves between 50 and 60% off of the cash price of prescriptions. Now, you can do this all via the NeedyMeds website, but if you don't have access to the NeedyMeds website, you can also reach out to us, bear with me a moment, by calling our 800 number, which you can find in the top right-hand corner of our website. So you can shoot me questions about that, or bear with me, you can contact me. I will provide my contact information at the end of the webinar. In the meantime, since you're a captive audience, I'll go ahead and brag about some of the other upcoming webinars we have scheduled for later in the month. Again, you can find those on the NeedyMeds calendar on the bottom right-hand side of our homepage. And finally, if you do have any questions about this webinar, you can shoot an email to me directly at carla@needymeds.org. You can also reach out to the International OCD Foundation via email or their phone number. And of course, if you'd like to learn more about NeedyMeds or you need help finding a patient assistance program or other cost assistance program, you can visit our website, needymeds.org, or you can give us a call on our 800 number indicated on that PowerPoint slide. For now, I'd like to thank you again for joining us today. Please know you will hear from me later today or by tomorrow with the PDFs of today's PowerPoint presentations. And of course, we extend a deep thank you and level of appreciation for Dr. Szymanski for sharing his expertise. So thank you for that, and we all very much look forward to keeping in touch. Stay happy and healthy. Thanks again, sir. Take care.